What I thought was betrayal was actually part of her game. A love triangle was a calculated scheme, a confession that made everything clear. My name is Jack Thompson, and I'm an ordinary man who once believed that the only thing that could truly break a marriage was infidelity. I never imagined it would happen to me, especially not in the way it did. At the time, I was 32, a quiet accountant for a small but respected firm in Houston. My wife, Lynn, and I had been together for nearly 6 years. We had what many would call a perfect marriage, or so I thought. The morning it all began to unravel was just like any other. I was working late at the office, trying to finish up a few last-minute reports for a big client. Barry Masters, my boss, was always on my back about being punctual and dedicated. Barry had been with the company longer than I had, and he had a way of making me feel small, but I shrugged it off. I had a good job, a loving wife, and a beautiful home. Life seemed perfect. But perfection is a fragile thing, and sometimes it only takes one moment to tear it all apart. Barry had that smug, almost predatory grin on his face when he stepped into my office that evening. "Everything in order, Jacko?" he asked, his tone too casual for my liking. It was the same look he always wore when he'd come over to my house for dinner, the one where he'd bask in the fact that he was spending time with my wife, as if it were some grand privilege. Barry wasn't the type to respect boundaries, and his discomforting comments and constant insinuations about my wife were hard to ignore. He never outright crossed the line, but I could feel the tension between us growing. He had a way of making Lynn uncomfortable, and I hated that about him. Still, I didn't suspect anything until that night. It had been a long day, but I knew Lynn would be home waiting for me. She always was, but tonight, something felt off. I came home to find the house unusually quiet. The light in the kitchen was off, and there was no smell of dinner cooking. I called out for Lynn, but there was no answer. I was just about to head to the bedroom when I heard something that froze me in my tracks. There, in the dim light from the hallway, I saw the unthinkable. My wife, lying in bed with none other than Barry. The man who had been rubbing his power in my face for months, the man who had made every dinner awkward with his suggestive comments, was now in my bed with my wife. I stood frozen in the doorway, my heart racing as I watched them. My mind refused to process what my eyes were seeing. There they were, in the most intimate way imaginable, her hand running along his chest, his lips inches from her ear, whispering things I couldn't hear but felt as if they were said directly to me. It wasn't a moment I had prepared myself for, nor one I could easily shake from my mind. I wanted to scream. I wanted to do anything but stand there, feeling like a fool, but I couldn't move. Everything in me screamed for action, but my body betrayed me, paralyzed by the truth crashing over me in waves. What had I missed? How had things spiraled this far? The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself, but the realization that this wasn't just about a momentary lapse in judgment. This was something planned, something deliberate. Barry had spent years making moves on my wife, and tonight, it all came to fruition. The sense of humiliation was suffocating, but I refused to let it show. As much as it hurt, I knew that the only way to take back control was to not give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I cleared my throat, a forced sound that broke the silence. "What the hell is going on here?" The words came out more strained than I intended. Lynn looked up, her eyes wide with shock. She froze, caught in the act. I could see the guilt in her face, but there was also something else, something that made my blood run cold. She wasn't surprised that I was there. In fact, she seemed almost relieved. Barry sat up quickly, fumbling for his shirt. "Jacko, man, this isn't what it looks like," he stammered, but his words fell flat. The damage was done. Nothing could undo the scene I had just walked into. I didn't need to hear excuses. The betrayal wasn't just physical. It was emotional, a devastating breach of trust that shattered everything I had believed about my marriage. No, Barry, it's exactly what it looks like. Lynn, trying to regain some semblance of control, quickly grabbed the sheets to cover herself. Bill, I can explain. But there was nothing to explain. The silence that followed her words felt suffocating. I wasn't angry anymore. I was numb. I turned around and walked out of the room. There was nothing to say. The woman I had loved for years was gone, and in her place was a stranger who had betrayed me in the worst way possible. Barry, too, had shown me his true nature. I had no place in that house anymore. I grabbed my coat and walked out into the cold night, not sure where I was going, but knowing I couldn't stay. The reality of my situation was too much to bear. I needed to escape, even if just for a little while. This was the moment my life changed forever. What followed would be a journey of heartbreak, self-discovery, and ultimately the ultimate revenge. The night air hit me like a cold slap in the face, and I didn't care. I needed space, time to process what I had just witnessed. The weight of betrayal was heavy on my chest, like an anchor pulling me into an abyss. I didn't even know where I was going, but my feet moved, taking me further and further from the house, from her, from everything I thought I knew. I walked for hours, letting my thoughts spin out of control. How long had this been going on? How many times had Barry used his position to manipulate Lynn? The more I thought about it, the more the questions gnawed at me, and the less I wanted to return home. My home. It wasn't mine anymore. I had been living a lie, and now the truth was suffocating me. By the time I found myself at a bar in the next town over, the numbness had begun to wear off, replaced by a burning rage I didn't know I was capable of. The bartender barely looked up as I took a seat at the counter and ordered a drink, but I didn't care. I wasn't there for conversation, not that I had the capacity for it. I just needed something to drown out the storm in my head. As the alcohol slowly began to blur the edges of my thoughts, a woman sat next to me. She had a striking look, long dark hair, sharp eyes, and a presence that demanded attention. She wasn't here to make small talk either. She ordered a drink and then turned to me, her gaze piercing. "You look like you're about to break," she said, her voice soft but direct. "What's going on?" I was taken aback. I wasn't exactly in the mood for a conversation, but something about her presence made it hard to turn away. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the emotions welling up inside of me. "I don't want to talk about it." She didn't push. Instead, she gave me a sympathetic smile and sipped her drink, letting the silence stretch between us. I could feel her studying me, reading me like an open book. It was unsettling, but in some strange way, it was comforting. "I know what it's like to have everything crash down around you," she said after a long pause. "It's not easy to pick up the pieces, but you will. You just need to find your way out of the fog." I looked at her, the words cutting through the haze of alcohol in my mind. I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear it, but I knew she was right. I needed to find a way to move forward. "How did you do it?" I asked quietly. She shrugged, a knowing look in her eyes. "I left, took a leap. It wasn't easy, but I had to take control of my life." The conversation drifted from there, and though it didn't offer any immediate solutions, something about her words lingered in my mind. Taking control. That's what I needed to do. I couldn't just let this betrayal define me. I needed to reclaim my life, even if it meant burning every bridge in my path. When I finally returned home, it was past midnight. The house was eerily quiet, but I could hear Lynn moving around upstairs. She was probably expecting me to come back, maybe even hoping for some kind of reconciliation. But there was no reconciling this. Not for me. Not after what she had done. I found myself standing at the bottom of the stairs, staring up at the dark hallway. The familiar sounds of our home, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the distant tick of the clock on the wall, none of it mattered anymore. The life we had built was shattered, and I couldn't bring myself to pretend it was still there. I heard her footsteps approach from the top of the stairs. "Bill?" she called, her voice soft and hesitant. "We need to talk." I didn't move, couldn't. The anger I had been suppressing was boiling over, but I held it in, not wanting to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. Not when everything was already falling apart. "I don't think there's anything left to say," I finally muttered, my voice tight. Lynn appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale in the dim light. She was wearing a robe, her hair falling messily around her shoulders. She looked like she had been waiting for me, hoping for some sort of apology, some kind of resolution, but there was nothing left to resolve. "Bill, please," she said, her voice breaking. I didn't mean for it to happen. You didn't mean for it to happen," I interrupted, finally turning to face her. "How long, Lynn? How long has this been going on? How many nights has he been in this house with you? And you didn't mean for it to happen?" The words were like acid, burning as they left my mouth. Her eyes filled with tears, but it didn't matter. She had already made her choice, and now I was left to deal with the wreckage. "I didn't want this, Bill," she whispered, her voice almost pleading. I was confused. Barry made me feel special. He made me feel like I was important. I shook my head, the reality of her words sinking in. She hadn't just cheated on me with him. She had chosen him because he made her feel like something more than the woman I had loved. She had chosen him because he fed her ego, gave her something I had never been able to. "Well, now you have him," I said, my voice cold. "I don't want anything to do with either of you." I turned away and walked out the front door, slamming it behind me. The house wasn't mine anymore, and neither was she. I spent the next few days in a haze of anger and disbelief. I didn't go to work, didn't speak to anyone. I didn't even answer the phone when Barry tried to reach me. He probably thought he was still in control, but that was about to change. The next time I saw him, I had a plan. The days that followed were a blur of frustration and simmering rage. I kept replaying the events in my mind over and over. The betrayal, the lies, and the humiliating way Barry had taken what was mine without a second thought. Lynn's apologetic texts and calls only pushed me further away. She couldn't undo what she'd done. The trust was gone, shattered beyond repair. I didn't need closure from her. What I needed was to make things right on my terms. I wasn't going to let Barry win. I wasn't going to let him continue manipulating my life and my marriage. It was time to take control back, and I wasn't going to sit idly by and let them continue their games. I woke up the morning after the confrontation with a plan. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about regaining my dignity, about showing both Barry and Lynn that I would no longer be their pawn. I called in sick to work that day, but instead of wallowing, I got to work. Needed leverage, something that would give me the upper hand in the fight I was about to wage. Barry thought he was untouchable, that his position and power could shield him from the consequences of his actions. He was wrong. First, I did some digging into Barry's past. It wasn't hard to find dirt. The man had a reputation for making advances on the wives of his colleagues, and I wasn't the first to suffer at his hands. His record was full of shady deals and under-the-table arrangements. But what interested me more were the business practices at the agency. BM & Sons wasn't as reputable as it seemed, and Barry had been using his position to exploit clients for years. I needed to get my hands on more concrete evidence, something that could bring him down once and for all. I spent the next few days researching, going through public records, and speaking to a few former employees who had worked with Barry in the past. The more I learned, the clearer it became. Barry wasn't just a man who crossed personal boundaries. He was a predator in every sense of the word. And now it was my turn to be the hunter. One evening after dinner, I sat Lynn down. She had returned to the house, her presence only adding to the suffocating atmosphere. It was clear she still didn't fully grasp the depth of her actions, but I was done explaining myself. I had no intention of continuing this charade. I looked her in the eyes, feeling the weight of everything I had held back for so long. "I'm done, Lynn," I said, my voice firm. "We're done. I don't care how sorry you are. I don't care about the excuses you keep coming up with. What you did to me, what you did to us, it's unforgivable." She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand to silence her. "No, don't. I've heard enough." Her face crumpled, and she began to cry, but I was unmoved. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, had destroyed everything. I wasn't going to beg for her to fix it. I had already made up my mind. "I'm not asking you to leave," I continued, "but I need you to understand something. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to take control of my life again. And if that means going to war with Barry and everyone who's helped him destroy me, then so be it." I walked out of the room before she could respond. I wasn't looking for her approval anymore. I was done playing the victim. The next day, I went to the office. I had already decided I wasn't going to let Barry continue to hold power over me. I wasn't going to walk into that building with my head down anymore. Instead, I was going to make sure he understood just how much trouble he was in. When I entered the office, I could feel the tension in the air. Barry wasn't in yet, but I knew he would be soon. I went straight to my desk and started digging through old files, searching for anything I could use to bring him down. By the time Barry walked in, I had already made a breakthrough. I had uncovered financial discrepancies, deals with shady clients, and enough evidence to take down his entire operation. I was ready. He walked into my office, his usual arrogant smirk on his face. But when he saw the look in my eyes, something shifted. The confident, untouchable man I had once known now seemed uncertain. "What's going on, Jacko?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I let him stew for a moment as I finished organizing the files in front of me. I could see him getting agitated, his gaze darting between the papers and my face. "I know what you've been doing, Barry," I finally said, my voice calm but deadly. "I know about the accounts you've been hiding, the money you've been laundering, the women you've been exploiting. I've got it all." Barry's face went pale. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. "You're going to pay for everything you've done," I said. "I'm going to make sure of it. You're going to lose everything. Your agency, your reputation, your freedom. All of it. It's over." Barry tried to bluster, but I could tell he knew the game was up. He was scrambling, looking for a way out, but there was no escape from the trap I had set. I stood up and walked out of his office, leaving him there, rattled and defeated. It was time to take control of my life, and it was going to be sweet. Later that evening, as I prepared for the inevitable confrontation with Lynn, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I had spent so long being a pawn in Barry's game, but now I was the one calling the shots. I knew the stakes were high, but I didn't care. It was time to reclaim my dignity, my life, and I was willing to do whatever it took. The days following my confrontation with Barry were a blur of preparations. I knew that the war I had started wasn't going to be over quickly. Barry was not the type of man who would go down without a fight, and Lynn, despite her recent actions, was still my wife. The emotional betrayal was deep, but my sense of justice was stronger than the hurt I was feeling. I spent the next couple of days putting the final pieces of my plan into place. I had already contacted a lawyer and presented him with all the evidence I had gathered. The legal implications of Barry's actions were crystal clear, but I wasn't just going to walk away from this. I wasn't going to let them destroy me and get away with it. But even as I felt the satisfaction of having the upper hand, there was still a gnawing feeling in my gut. I wasn't just fighting Barry anymore. I was fighting for everything I had worked for, everything I had believed in. The house, the job, the marriage. Everything had been ripped away from me in one night. And though I had Barry on the ropes, there was still a part of me that wanted revenge. Lynn had been quiet, almost too quiet, in the days that followed our argument. I could see the guilt in her eyes whenever she looked at me. She knew what she had done, but she was too proud to admit the full extent of her betrayal. She hadn't even tried to apologize, not in any real way. When she came into the living room that evening, I knew it was coming. The confrontation. She stood there in the doorway, her robe wrapped tightly around her, her eyes avoiding mine. I need to talk to you," she said, her voice tentative, unsure. I didn't respond at first. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear what she had to say. After everything that had happened, it felt like there was nothing left to discuss. Still, I motioned for her to sit down. "I don't want to be here anymore, Bill," she said, the words coming out haltingly. "I can't keep doing this. What we had, it's over. I've made my choice. I've made mistakes. But I'm not the only one to blame here." I wanted to laugh. The audacity of it. She was still trying to shift the blame, to make herself the victim in this scenario. "Lynn, you don't get to do that," I said, my voice cold. "You made your choice. You chose him. You didn't just make a mistake. You betrayed me. You took everything we had and you threw it away." Her face flushed, and she looked down, clearly struggling with her emotions. But there was something in her eyes that stopped me. Guilt, yes, but also something else. Regret. Real regret. And maybe, just maybe, a glimmer of realization about what she had lost. "I never wanted to hurt you, Bill," she said, her voice breaking. I was confused. I thought Barry cared about me. He made me feel special. He said things I wanted to hear. I clenched my jaw, the anger bubbling up again. "And you couldn't hear me? You couldn't see how much I cared about you? How much I did for you? You really think I didn't give you everything? Everything I had?" She shook her head, tears starting to fall. I know now, but it doesn't change what happened." "Then why are you here?" I asked. "Why come to me now? What do you expect from me?" "I don't know," she whispered. I need you to understand that I'm sorry. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I want you to know that I never meant for it to go this far. I'm not the woman you thought I was." And that was it. The moment I realized the truth. She wasn't the woman I thought she was. She was someone else, someone I didn't know. And the saddest part was that I had been blind to it for so long. I had ignored the signs, trusting her without question. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you, Lynn," I said quietly. "I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. You took something from me that I can never get back. And what you did to me, what you did to us, it can't be fixed with a simple apology." The silence between us was heavy. She didn't say anything, but I could see the guilt written all over her face. I didn't want to care anymore. I didn't want to feel this ache, this betrayal. But I did, and it hurt. It hurt more than I ever thought it could. But I wasn't going to let it break me. Not again. Later that evening, I received a call from my lawyer. The papers were ready. The divorce papers. It was time to make everything official. I had prepared for this moment, but now that it was here, I wasn't sure what to expect. Lynn had already been served with the papers for adultery and cruelty. But this wasn't just about the divorce anymore. This was about taking back everything she and Barry had stolen from me. I went to the lawyer's office the next morning to sign the papers. There was no going back now. My life, my future was about to change. The day of the divorce. Hearing arrived quickly. I showed up, confident in my case, but still unsure of what would happen. I had prepared for months, gathering all the evidence I could against Barry and Lynn. The affair, the lies, the manipulation, all of it was laid bare. When the judge entered the courtroom, I could feel my pulse quicken. This was it. This was the moment I would finally get my justice. But then, as I took my seat, I saw him, Barry. He was sitting at the other side of the courtroom, his face full of that same smug confidence. He thought he had won. He thought he was untouchable. But I wasn't going to let him have the last word. As the proceedings began, I could feel the weight of everything I had been through. The emotions, the betrayal, the pain. It all came rushing back. But I wasn't going to let it control me anymore. This was my chance to show them both that they had underestimated me. The courtroom was silent as I sat there, my hands clenched tightly in my lap. Barry and Lynn were seated across from me, both trying to look confident, but I could see the nervous tension in their eyes. Lynn had not expected the depth of the evidence I had gathered against her. Barry, on the other hand, looked like he was trying to hold onto the last shred of power he had. As the proceedings went on, I felt a strange calm wash over me. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my future. The betrayal had been painful, but it had also forced me to confront the truth. I had been living a lie for too long. The man I had been, the person I thought I was, no longer existed. But from the ashes of that old life, something stronger, wiser, and more determined had emerged. Just when I thought the hearing would end in the predictable way, Lynn's guilt acknowledged, Barry facing the consequences of his actions. A twist came that I never could have anticipated. The judge paused, looking at the documents in front of him, then glanced at Barry and Lynn before turning to me. "Mr. Thompson," he said, "there's something we need to address before this case moves forward." I looked at him, confusion creeping in. What more could there be? I had presented everything, every lie, every betrayal. I was prepared for a clean break, a fresh start. But then the judge continued, his voice heavy with an unexpected weight. "I've just been informed of a recent development that could change the course of this trial." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" The judge motioned for his assistant to bring something forward, a thick envelope sealed with official-looking markings. He slid it across the table toward me, and I opened it carefully. Inside, I found a series of letters and statements, along with a notarized affidavit from a woman named Amy Stewart. Amy? I had no idea how she could be involved. I thought I had already uncovered everything about Barry's deceit, but this was something else entirely. The letters inside revealed a shocking truth. Amy Stewart, the woman I had worked with, had been blackmailing Barry for years. It turned out that Barry was not just manipulating me and Lynn. He had been the target of his own manipulation. Amy had orchestrated the affair between her and Lynn, not out of love or desire, but to control Barry. She had been slowly pushing Lynn into his arms, making sure the affair took place, all so she could later leverage it to get what she wanted. She had known that Barry was too proud to resist, too arrogant to see the trap he was walking into. And Amy, playing her role as the perfect new hire, had used the affair to set up the ultimate power play. The truth hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been played from the beginning, not just by Lynn, but by Amy as well. The woman who had seemed so innocent, so sweet, had been plotting from day one to bring Barry down, and in the process, she had nearly destroyed my life. But why? Why hadn't I seen it? How had I missed all the signs? In the following moments, as the judge reviewed the documents, everything became clear. Barry wasn't the mastermind here. Amy had been pulling the strings all along. She had been the one whispering in Lynn's ear, feeding her insecurities, pushing her into Barry's arms. She had been the one pushing me to confront Barry, knowing full well that I would eventually break and give in to the anger and betrayal. As the judge concluded, it became apparent that the case was no longer about just me and Lynn. It was about Amy's manipulations and the way she had orchestrated everything, making sure that Barry's downfall came at the hands of the very people he had tried to control. In the end, it was Amy who had been the true villain. The judge's verdict was unexpected. Lynn was granted a small portion of our assets due to the emotional and financial hardships caused by her actions. But Amy's role was exposed in full. Barry lost everything, not just his job, but his freedom. The agency was shut down, his illicit dealings uncovered, and he was facing criminal charges for the many schemes he had run for years. As for me, I walked out of the courtroom that day knowing that I had regained control. My life, once torn apart by betrayal and lies, was now heading in a new direction. I wasn't a victim anymore. I wasn't the man who had been deceived. I was the man who had taken back what was rightfully mine, and I had learned something valuable in the process. Even in the darkest moments, truth and justice have a way of making themselves known.